The education of kids has always been a source of contentious debates because we believe that it reflects society and we want society to be just like us. Kids will eventually be the ones in charge, so we want them to be good and perpetuate our values, progressive or conservative. Public education has always been the space where those ideological battles happen, but things seem to be getting really intense lately. With the rise of the social media account, Libs of TikTok, which serves as a platform to hate on inclusive teachers, I guess. We have something similar in France, very scary. Well, because of that, the public school boards have become a place for ideological battles. Looking at what public schools are increasingly becoming, more and more parents choose to homeschool. Now, this is not a new phenomenon, but it's taking new forms. One of them is the topic of this video, unschooling. To be fully honest with you, I didn't know what unschooling was until I saw a couple of commentary channels talk about it. So I did my research, I'm coming at you with some hot takes, with some knowledge with a capital K. Basically I wanted to understand where unschooling comes from, why it's so popular, and why parents who pride themselves for being part of that community might be getting it wrong. Back in the days, you couldn't go to school unless you were part of a certain class of people. Schools later became public and free because people recognized that in a wannabe democratic society, the education of the masses was a moral duty. So free schools, free education, the school system, public schools would be the place where we forge citizens, workers, to make society progress. Ideally, this is the goal of public schools, and we can agree that they fulfill that goal to some extent. But we can also acknowledge that schools serve other purposes. In fact, social scientists have shown that schools are also a place where we forge a specific type of citizen, a disciplined citizen. The school curriculum, often influenced by officials and their political beliefs, give a specific view of history of the world. In an interview she gave to Rolling Stones, one of the most popular online unschooling advocates, Mami Onami, explained that, quote, "Trying to make my kid a civic-minded being in a functioning democracy? That's the fucking last thing I want for my kid, is to be like everybody else, is to learn how to operate within a system that I think is fundamentally broken." She adds, "School is the institution that prepares people to live in that world and to not question the authority that is keeping that world turning. This concern pushes me so much deeper into being a homeschooling fan," Onami says, "because that's not what I want for my kids at all." That little paragraph is actually the end of the Rolling Stone article, so that means that the author kind of agrees with Onami, or at least doesn't have much to say, any contradiction to bring. Rhetorically speaking, using a quote without adding any comments is a way to say what you want to say, but not say it directly, so you kind of use someone else to say what you want to say. So the article leaves us with a bunch of questions. Is that it? Is unschooling the answer to the many failures of our democracies? In other words, is the solution to a broken system to live it and let it die? Mami Onami is rightly skeptical about the school system and our system in general. The school is yet another public institution that prepares kids to become disciplined citizens. The ringing bell, the timetable, the authority of the teacher, the homework, all of that prepare the kid for its future disciplined life. And we're not talking about self-discipline. We're talking about the discipline expected from authoritarian figures like the boss, the teacher, the police, even if they misbehave. Onami kind of stands against that disciplinary society. She doesn't want her children to fit in that mold and perpetuate that system. That's why she chose unschooling. Now, Onami is definitely on that branch of self-reliance, anti-establishment content. She looks hippie, alternative, magical even, but it's the same old self-help, entrepreneurial content, you see? That's who she is, that's what she believes in, but that's also her business, and she's right to talk about unschooling because the term has become very trendy, as Google Trends tell me. Before you type that comment, yes, I know. I'm also taking advantage of the fact that it's trendy. I'm an entrepreneur as well, you know. Onami's case is interesting though. Oftentimes when we talk about homeschoolers, we think about religious families that want to raise their kids according to their faith. But Onami isn't like that. As we explained earlier, unschooling is a specific type of homeschooling. So that means that the unschooling trend brings new people to the homeschooling lifestyle. Like, look at this article from the Washington Post in which they explain new data regarding homeschooling. Quote, "Homeschooling's surging popularity crosses every measurable line of politics, geography, and demographics. The number of homeschooled kids has increased 373% over the past 6 years in the small city of Anderson, South Carolina, aka conservative, and it also increased 358% in a school district in the Bronx, mostly Democratic. Now, it's important to keep in mind that the rise in homeschooling and unschooling is primarily a US phenomenon. Contrary to what this Guardian article implies, homeschooling in the UK is not increasing much. It's actually written on the report they quoted that, quote, "This new data collection increases are likely to be due at least in part because of improvements in data quality." So the rise in homeschooling in the UK is not as dramatic as it seems. Looking at various reports and studies, it is difficult to pinpoint one reason why parents choose to homeschool. Sometimes it's a lifestyle choice, sometimes it's a religious choice, sometimes it's related to the mental health of the kid, and a lot of parents actually can't really give a reason why they homeschool. All of that to say that Onami's case is interesting but shouldn't represent what education is becoming. Basically, she's a minority case amplified by social media algorithms. Nevertheless, I think that the topic of homeschooling or unschooling raise important questions regarding the future of education in an increasingly individualistic world. Unschooling is presented as an answer to the problems of education, but I would argue that it is part of them. Onami explains that 80% of high achievers are the products of our disciplinary school system, but the 20% remaining, her kids, she hopes, don't have to follow those rules. In other words, Onami is only half anti-establishment. She still wants her kids to be successful, but through an unconventional way. She doesn't really question the system, she wants to gain the system through a different path. This is why I have a problem with people like her using the term unschooling. The philosophy of unschooling isn't new, it has a long history, and what you see on social media doesn't necessarily reflect that. Now allow me to give you a bit more context, a bit more information as to that history, that philosophy. And we'll start with William Godwin. William Godwin was an English philosopher, political writer, and novelist. He had progressive views on education that aligned with his broader philosophical beliefs about human nature, society, and individual potential. For example, Godwin believed that education should focus on developing the individual's rational faculties and moral character. He emphasized the importance of critical thinking, reasoning, and intellectual independence, arguing that individuals should be encouraged to think for themselves rather than merely absorbing information passively. Godwin was critical of traditional educational methods that relied on coercion and authoritarian discipline. He thought that those institutions perpetuated social inequalities and reinforced existing power structures, but also destroyed creativity, curiosity, and the natural development of the mind. Instead, he advocated for an education system which reinforced the autonomy and independence of the learner. Another anarchist thinker, German philosopher Max Turner, wrote in his essay The Fourth Principle of Our Education that the modern learner is perceived as, quote, an object, someone to be acted upon rather than one encouraged to move towards subjective self-realization and liberation. He adds that, quote, a knowledge which only burdens me as a belonging and a possession, instead of having gone along with me completely, so that the free-moving ego, not encumbered by any dragging possessions, passes through the world with a fresh spirit. Such a knowledge, then, which has not become personal, furnishes a poor preparation for life. End of the quote. So he sees knowledge as a tool serving the individual on their quest to become a free spirit, a free-moving ego. On the other hand, if knowledge is something that we just put on ourselves to fulfill expectations, like getting a good mark, getting a diploma, then knowledge loses its emancipatory power. The quote I've just read makes me think of Brazilian educator Paulo Freire's banking approach of education, which he criticized. So what is the banking approach of education? Well, banking refers to the idea that the teachers are asked to act as bank clerks, depositing information into students rather than drawing out knowledge from individual students or creating inquisitive beings with a thirst for knowledge. Freire valued the input of the student because he saw the students as someone capable of thinking, evaluating, and making decisions. In that new equation, the teacher becomes a guide, a mediator, and knowledge circulates in multiple directions, between the teacher and the student and the teacher, but also between students. The funny thing is that we do find those ideas in unschooling content online. Parents explain that they let their kids select what they want to do, what are their priorities. Parents guide them in the learning. They understand that knowledge can be acquired in various ways, and so they want their kids to understand that as well. As an example, a creator like Ballerina Farm regularly asks her homeschooled children to join her as she cooks or help out in the farm. It's hard to look at those images and think, boo, that is bad, because we all know that she's teaching lifelong skills to her children and trust them in the process. Of course, there are limits to that. Like, we can all agree that giving a knife to your kid is not a good idea. But anyway, one of the reasons why unschooling content is so popular is that it reminds us of the importance of manual skills. Kids are more often shown doing creative manual tasks than intellectual tasks. In fairness, this is probably one of the biggest concerns of the people who comment under those videos. The fact that kids do a lot of manual stuff, but they don't really do the intellectual stuff. They don't know how to write, how to calculate and all those things. This is partly true and a little bit concerning at times, not gonna lie. But I feel like it's also revealing of the little value we give to manual work. Russian anarcho-communist theorist Peter Kropotkin was concerned about this hierarchy between what he called brain work and manual work. He advocated for an éducation intégrale. He wrote it in French. I didn't see it translated, so I guess he just wanted to sound cool in French and everything, you know. But éducation intégrale means integral education, as you guessed it, and that includes both manual and brain work. For him, that was the best way to, one, fight against the stigma attached to manual work, which facilitates the exploitation of the working class. You know, this idea that working people are inferior, they work, they use their body, whereas middle and upper class people are superior because they use their brain, they think. And the second reason why we should promote éducation intégrale is that it increases our coolness by 100%. Because we love an intellectual with manual skills, right? I'm totally thinking about philosopher Simone Weil, who spent 2 years working in a factory, or sociologist Loïc Vacan, who almost became a professional boxer when he went to Chicago Southside to train in a boxing club. So hot. Anyway, the argument was that unschooling content kind of shows all those ideas, so why am I complaining? Well, homeschoolers might see themselves as alternative because they remove their kids from the normative system that is the public school system. However, what they really do is that they move the kids from one normative system to another normative system, from the school to the home. The home or the family is an extremely normative structure that can have total control over the formation of an individual being. Contrary to the teacher, parents have a ton of rights over their underage children, so that means that taking kids away from school to bring them back in the home technically reduces the child's freedom, not the contrary. That lack of freedom then means less space to explore new ways of thinking and being, since confrontation with the outside world is tremendously reduced. That doesn't mean that the family is inherently bad. There are good families out there who see their kids as free thinkers, who give them a lot of freedom. The same can be said about teachers who see their students as subjects and not objects. The problem is that the structures in which those well-meaning people evolve don't promote such behavior. They are the exception and not the norm. And to be honest, you can have cases of people who think they are well-meaning, that they let their kids be free, and in fact are still quite controlling because the structure is so ingrained that they don't even realize that they're exerting that power over their kids. That's why the anarchist thinkers I talked about earlier didn't imagine that their ideals would be achieved in the context of the family. Godwin believed in the decentralization of education, so that means the removal of the state. But he didn't think the family was an alternative. For him, children should be educated by communities of people, not just one or two parents. And I know some people are going to scream when I say this. Yeah, we've been told that a kid needs a daddy and a mummy in order to thrive. Well, things are a bit more complex than that. And to be honest, the nuclear family as it exists today is rather new. Not too long ago, multiple generations of people lived under the same roof. People didn't live as long, so sometimes a parent would die and an auntie or someone else in the community would take care of the child. In many families, the father is completely absent or gone, so the mother can be helped by, friends, siblings, etc. Sometimes divorced families are an opportunity for kids to feel more free. That was definitely the case for me. I'm very happy that my parents separated, I actually smiled when they announced it to us. And that doesn't mean that it was fun or that it's still fun, but it meant that me and my sister were more independent. It also triggered my dad's competitive side, to be honest. Growing up, my mom was the one finding cool, free activities to do in the weekends, cultural activities, outdoor activities, etc. But when they separated, my dad was so obsessed with being perceived as a good dad that he got us on every single free activity organized by the council. That could be a demonstration of dunes formation in Dunkirk, or nighttime bat searches with a bat expert, or mushroom walks as well. Honestly, that was really, really cool. Those free activities were great. Super underrated as well. Only boomers went, which is kind of a shame. So basically, my dad went from being a pretty basic dad who doesn't really care about their children to someone we had good times with. And to be honest with you, we don't even call him dad, my sister and I. We call him by his first name because we don't really see him as a dad. You see, we taught him things, he taught us things. We have more of a friendship relationship, I don't know. It was more like a house share with someone you're attached to, someone you're financially dependent on as well, for sure. But still, in many, many places all around the world, kids are raised by communities of people, not just a couple, and they end up perfectly fine, or just as fucked up as kids from nuclear families. I guess there are two ways to look at it. Kids just need to feel like they are in a stable environment and that they have people they can rely on. The rest is pretty much conservative BS that has been debunked times and times again. Godwin also adds that education shouldn't be confined to childhood, so that adults should also pursue intellectual development, personal development throughout their life. Again, that can be a bit difficult if you follow a traditional nuclear family trajectory, because in a traditional couple structure, you're expected to spend most of your time with your partner. Actually, the I progressively becomes a we, and the self becomes even more blurred when babies come along. It gets very easy to end up in a situation where there is no space left for personal growth, for intellectual development. So that means that you reach a point of stagnation, and for many more than those willing to admit it, this makes life boring. So to conclude, unschooling as it is presented on social media may not be the revolutionary alternative that it claims to be. It rather is a transfer from one normative system, the school, to another normative system, the family. But we explained that unschooling is not just a social media trend, it's the product of a body of thought that stretches back to a very long time ago. In this video, we talked about Godwin, Stirner, Freire, and Kropotkin. Those thinkers show that a truly alternative education model can only exist in a truly transformed society. It means that their thoughts can only be understood in the context of a complete shift, a societal shift, from the nuclear family to a more community-based society. This might scare a lot of you. I mean, abolishing the family, what is that? The family is the pillar of our societies, isn't it? But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people already live this way all around the world, and we can learn from them. So yeah, I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. As always, the conversation continues in the comments section. Don't forget to like, to subscribe if it's not already done. I would like to thank my patrons for their support, and a special thanks to top tier patrons: Gazi Chic, Neil Verma, Galinax de Haute-Moselle, Nyop Nguyen, Patrick Button, Devish Mohan Mina, Jeff Lee, Dominic Dalek, Yilan Huang, Tayab Matin, Nick, Tinful Pancakes, Marshall, Brandon, James, Ojwal, Pablo, Patrick, Boris, Ria, Ivan, Donage, Alex, Toki, Koriji, Tristan, Patricia, Christopher, Manuel, Christopher France, and Perry. And thank you to the other ones who prefer to stay anonymous. Finally, I need to talk to you about my sponsor, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one platform to grow your presence online. They give you a bunch of tools to create your ideal websites. So this is mine so far, Alice Capelle. I use it as a platform to kind of show all the work that I do on YouTube, my contributions, but also my book. I also added all my social media accounts. You also have analytical tools. You can run effective email campaigns. On their website, you can also get advice from professionals on how to build your website, etc. So many things you can do. So if you're interested in it, if you want to try it out, then go to squarespace.com to get a free trial. And once you're ready to go public, then you can go to squarespace.com/alice.cappelleyt to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring the video, and yeah, that's it. I'll see you very soon. Salut!